The black SUV rolled to a stop beside the sprawling parade ground of Fort Jackson, its tires crunching over the gravel like the slow pulse of a heartbeat. The morning sun burned through the mist that still clung to the barracks, bathing the field in a sharp golden light. The air smelled of sweat, steel, and something else, the unmistakable mixture of discipline and pressure that defined every inch of this U.S. Army base. When Lieutenant Emma Carter stepped out, the air seemed to still for a moment. She wasn't tall, nor imposing, but there was something about the calm way she carried herself, the poise in her eyes, that demanded attention. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, boots gleaming, hair tied back so tightly it could have cut glass. She looked every bit the soldier, yet she carried a quiet energy that stood apart from the rigid world around her. "Lieutenant Carter, reporting for assignment," she said, snapping a salute to the officer waiting for her, Captain Myers, a broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by decades of command. He returned the salute, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Welcome to Fort Jackson, Lieutenant. You'll be commanding Bravo Company, 2nd Cadet Division." Her stomach tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant. Bravo Company had a reputation. Tough, defiant, and often at odds with authority. It wasn't the kind of assignment you gave a newcomer unless you wanted to test them, or break them. "Yes, sir," Emma replied evenly. As they walked toward the main training field, Myers briefed her on schedules, protocols, and the never-ending list of bureaucratic details. But beneath his words, Emma sensed something else, hesitation. Every time he mentioned the cadets, his tone carried a subtle warning. Finally, he stopped near the edge of the field, where a group of trainees were running drills under the barking command of a senior sergeant. Myers folded his arms. "Lieutenant, I'll be honest. Some of the cadets, and even a few instructors, aren't thrilled about your assignment." Emma met his gaze without flinching. "Because I'm young," she said quietly. He hesitated. "Because you're young. And because you're you. This is a combat prep company. Most of these cadets haven't served under a female officer before. Some think they know better." Emma's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Then they'll learn something new." Myers studied her for a moment and nodded slowly. "You've got guts. You'll need them here." The next morning, the sound of a bugle shattered the dawn. Emma stood before her unit for the first time, the rising sun behind her, turning her silhouette into a dark outline against the fiery sky. 40 cadets in fatigues stood in rigid lines before her, eyes forward but filled with curiosity and skepticism. She scanned the rows. They were young, some barely 20, others with the hardened look of soldiers who'd seen too much too soon. But one face stood out immediately, Cadet Mark Holloway. He was tall, muscular, with a smirk that never seemed to fade. Even standing at attention, his posture was loose, rebellious. His eyes locked on Emma's with a kind of silent challenge. Not aggressive yet, but daring. "Good morning, Bravo Company," Emma began, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the chatter of the early wind. "I'm Lieutenant Emma Carter. For the next 12 weeks, I'm responsible for turning you into soldiers worthy of the U.S. Army uniform. That means you'll hate me some days. You'll curse me under your breath. But when you march out of here, if you make it that far, you'll understand why." A murmur passed through the ranks. Some nodded subtly, but others looked unconvinced. Holloway smirked again, and Emma caught it, though she didn't react. She continued. "Discipline, respect, and teamwork. These aren't just words here. They're survival. If you can't follow orders, you're not just failing yourself. You're endangering everyone around you. Out there," she pointed toward the distant horizon, "mistakes cost lives. In here, they cost careers." The cadets straightened slightly. Even the wind seemed to listen. When she finished, she paused for a moment, letting the silence hang. "Dismissed," she finally said, and as the cadets broke formation, she caught whispers, low voices, skeptical laughter. It didn't bother her. She'd heard it before. Every new post came with the same resistance. But something about Holloway's lingering stare gave her pause. He didn't look amused anymore. He looked angry. Later that day, Emma walked the perimeter of the base, clipboard in hand. She checked training schedules, weapon inspection records, and field assignments. Everything was in order, but her mind kept circling back to Holloway. There was something about him that unsettled her, not just his defiance, but the intensity behind it. Sergeant Davis, her second in command, caught up to her. "Ma'am," he said, keeping pace, "word of advice. Watch that one. Holloway. You know him? Everyone does. Smart. Strong. But got a mouth that'll get him discharged one day. His father's a colonel up north. That's why he's still here after 3 write-ups." Emma frowned slightly. "Privilege in uniform is poison." Davis chuckled darkly. "You won't get any disagreement here, Mom." They reached the mess hall, where laughter and chatter echoed off the metal walls. Emma stopped at the entrance, watching her cadets, tired, dirty, but alive with the energy of youth. She'd been them once, years ago, before war, before bureaucracy, before leadership became both honor and burden. She thought of her first commander, the man who told her that leadership wasn't about being feared, but about being followed willingly. That lesson had carried her through every mission, every sleepless night. Now, standing at Fort Jackson, surrounded by cadets who doubted her, she felt that lesson take root again. If she could reach them, not through intimidation, but through strength and consistency, she could shape them into something better. That night, Emma stood alone outside her quarters, the wind whispering through the flagpoles. The stars above seemed unnaturally bright, scattered across the black canvas of the sky. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint echo of laughter, Holloway's voice among them. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking. She turned away, tightening her jaw. This was the beginning of something. She could feel it. A kind of friction that either forges trust or sparks disaster. Still, she smiled faintly. Every great leader, she reminded herself, had faced resistance before respect. She wasn't here to be liked, she was here to lead. As she entered her quarters, the lights flickered for a moment, casting long shadows across the walls. She sat at her desk and opened her field journal, writing her first entry since arrival. Fort Jackson, Day 1. Cadets are skilled but undisciplined. Holloway may be trouble, though trouble often hides potential. The base feels tense, like a coiled spring. I'll need to earn their trust before I can command their obedience. Tomorrow begins the first test, for them and for me. She closed the book, exhaled slowly, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the wind howled through the training grounds, carrying with it the unspoken promise of storms to come. What Emma didn't know was that one of her cadets, the same one who'd mocked her from afar, was already unraveling. His anger wasn't just toward her rank or her gender. It ran deeper, tangled in years of resentment, expectation, and fear. And in a few short weeks, that anger would find its breaking point, with the barrel of a gun aimed straight at her head. The dawn siren echoed across Fort Jackson, sharp and merciless, cutting through the quiet of the sleeping base. Within minutes, cadets poured out of the barracks, boots thudding, uniforms half-buttoned, breath clouding in the cool morning air. The first field exercise of the season had begun. Lieutenant Emma Carter stood at the edge of the training field, arms crossed, watching as the platoons assembled. A light wind stirred her hair beneath her cap, carrying the faint scent of damp soil and gun oil. It was her first official drill, as commanding officer of Bravo Company, and she knew every move she made today would define her leadership. "Sergeant Davis," she called. "Yes, ma'am?" "Run them hard. I want to see what they're made of before the sun hits noon." Davis grinned. "With pleasure, ma'am." The whistle blew and chaos erupted. The cadets charged across the obstacle course, climbing, crawling, jumping, and shouting commands. Mud splashed, metal clanked, and the field became a blur of motion. Emma paced slowly along the perimeter, her sharp eyes noting every hesitation, every lapse in coordination. She wasn't there to intimidate. She was there to observe, to understand who led under pressure and who cracked. It didn't take long for one name to stand out again: Holloway. His movements were powerful, almost flawless, but he wasn't following orders. Instead of waiting for his squad, he charged ahead alone, finishing obstacles before anyone else. When one cadet slipped trying to scale a wall, Holloway didn't stop to help. He barked something under his breath and kept moving. Emma blew her whistle. "Cadet Holloway." He froze mid-stride, annoyed. "Ma'am? Did you forget what team operation means?" He smirked, wiping mud from his face. "No, ma'am. Just figured it's faster to do it right the first time." "Faster doesn't mean better," she replied calmly. "You're not training to be a hero. You're training to lead." A few cadets stifled laughter, but Holloway's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am," he said stiffly, before turning away. But the defiance in his eyes didn't fade. Emma noted it silently. She'd dealt with egos before, but this one was different. Holloway's pride wasn't arrogance born of inexperience. It was armor, built from something deeper. And that made him dangerous. By noon, the field glistened with sweat and mud. The cadets dropped to the ground, exhausted, gasping for breath. Emma stood before them, expression unreadable. "Not bad," she said evenly. "But teamwork is still your weakest link. Out there, one person's mistake can get the entire unit killed. You will not survive combat by showing off. You survive by trusting each other." She let the words hang in the air, walking down the line of exhausted faces. When she reached Holloway, she stopped. His chest heaved, mud streaked across his face, but his eyes were sharp, unbroken. "Something you want to say, cadet?" she asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "With respect, ma'am, we're not at war. We're training. Some of us just want to be pushed harder." "Then you'll get your wish," Emma said quietly. "Tomorrow. 0400 hours. Solo endurance run. 20 kilometers. You'll lead it." The smirk faltered. Around him, the other cadets tried to hide their reactions. "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice tight. That evening, the barracks buzzed with low conversation. Holloway sat on his bunk, rolling a bullet casing between his fingers, a habit he picked up years ago. His best friend, Cadet Rivera, glanced over. "Man, what's your deal with her?" Rivera asked. "She's not that bad." Holloway gave a humorless laugh. "You don't get it. People like her walk in and act like they've got something to prove. The rest of us pay the price." "She's your CO," Rivera reminded him. "You keep pushing her, you're gonna get crushed." Holloway's jaw clenched. Or maybe she will. But deep down, even he wasn't sure who he was angrier at, Emma or himself. The next morning, before dawn, the air was icy and still. The training ground lights cast long shadows over the dirt track. Holloway stood at the starting line, backpack loaded with gear, face set in grim determination. Emma watched from the sidelines, clipboard in hand. "You set your pace, cadet," she said. "You stop, you fail. You finish, you lead tomorrow's exercise." He didn't reply. When the whistle blew, he ran. The first few kilometers were easy. He'd always been physically strong, a natural athlete. But by the 10th, fatigue began to crawl into his muscles. Every breath felt heavier. Sweat trickled down his temples, stinging his eyes. As the sky brightened, Emma followed his route in a jeep with Davis, keeping distance. She watched him push himself through exhaustion, refusing to quit even when his legs trembled. Davis glanced at her. "You're testing him hard." "He's testing me," Emma said softly. When Holloway finally crossed the finish line 2 hours later, he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Emma stepped forward, her boots crunching over gravel. She held out a water bottle. He looked up at her, unsure whether it was a trick. "Take it," she said. "You earned it." After a pause, he grabbed it, gulping down the water. Emma studied him quietly. "That's what leadership looks like, Cadet. You push hard. Not for yourself, but to show others what's possible." For the first time, his expression faltered. Something like respect flickered, briefly, in his eyes. Later that afternoon, the company gathered for tactical drills. Emma's instructions were clear, concise, and relentless. She made no exceptions. Mistakes meant do-overs. Hesitation meant lapse. By sunset, exhaustion and frustration hung over the unit like a storm. Holloway's patience snapped again when his squad fumbled a navigation task. "Come on," he shouted, throwing his helmet to the ground. "We keep doing it her way. We're never going to get it right." Emma turned slowly. The field went silent. She walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said evenly. "You're not doing it right. Because you're not listening." He glared at her, chest rising and falling. "Maybe I'm listening to the wrong person." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The cadets stared, waiting for her to explode, to punish him, to put him in his place. Instead, she spoke quietly. "Cadet Holloway, step forward." He obeyed, though his jaw was tight with defiance. "Look around you," Emma said. "Every one of these people depends on you. On your discipline, your strength, your judgment. Do you think they'll trust you if you can't control your temper?" The question hit him like a blow. His hands clenched, then loosened. His gaze dropped. "No, ma'am," he muttered. "Good," she said, "because tomorrow you'll be leading them again. And this time, you'll do it my way." She turned and walked off, her boots echoing against the concrete, leaving him standing there in silence. That night, Holloway couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of the barracks, the flickering light from the hallway casting shadows across the room. Emma's words replayed in his head. "Do you think they'll trust you if you can't control your temper?" For the first time in a long while, he didn't have an answer. Out on the field, Emma stood alone again, the wind cold against her face. She looked out over the training grounds, their edges fading into darkness. Her gut told her that Holloway's rebellion wasn't over. But what she couldn't yet see was the depth of what was building beneath the surface. Resentment, confusion, and something much darker that would soon boil over. The tension between them had only just begun. And the next time they faced each other, it wouldn't end with words. By the time the third week rolled around at Fort Jackson, the air had grown heavier, thicker with exhaustion, pride, and something else that no one dared say aloud. Tension. The cadets were sharper, faster, more coordinated, but beneath that surface of discipline, cracks were forming. Lieutenant Emma Carter could feel it before she even saw it. It was in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. In the way the laughter around the mess hall quieted just a little too quickly. She didn't need to hear the words. She could feel the resistance in the air, subtle, silent, but unmistakable. The drills that week were brutal. Emma designed them that way on purpose, not as punishment, but as pressure. Pressure revealed character. and she needed to see who these cadets really were before she could shape them into soldiers. But one man didn't need any more pressure. Cadet Mark Holloway was already a storm contained by sheer will. The morning of the squad evaluation began with the metallic clang of rifles and shouted orders. The cadets were divided into teams, each tasked with navigating a simulated battlefield, coordinating communications, strategizing movements, and executing objectives under strict time constraints. Emma watched from the observation tower, binoculars pressed to her eyes. The field below was a maze of trenches and barricades, and the shouts of the cadets echoed across the base. Most teams moved efficiently, adapting to the chaos. But Holloway's team, they were falling apart. Cadet Holloway, status update. The radio crackled. His frustrated voice came through. We're moving west. The come line's down. I told you it's the wrong frequency. Emma frowned. The voice that responded wasn't calm, it was panicked. You're not listening, Holloway. She said east flank. I am listening. You're just... A sharp burst of static cut the line. Emma lowered the binoculars. Her instinct told her what was happening before she saw it. Holloway wasn't following orders again. He was leading his team his way, convinced he knew better. 10 minutes later, his squad failed the simulation. When the final whistle blew, the cadets trudged back to formation, covered in dirt and sweat. The rest of the base stood in silence as Emma approached, her boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. Report, she ordered. Holloway stepped forward, his uniform soaked, his face streaked with mud and anger. Ma'am, communication failed halfway through the mission. I made a call to... You ignored a direct order, Emma interrupted, voice low but firm. You went west when your team was instructed east. He stared at her, defiant. With respect, ma'am, the map coordinates were wrong. If I'd gone east, we'd have been boxed in. Emma took a step closer. And instead, you led your team straight into crossfire. Your decisions don't exist in isolation, cadet. Every time you choose pride over protocol, people pay for it. Murmurs rippled through the formation. Holloway's fists clenched. He could feel every eye on him. Waiting, watching. He snapped. Maybe people wouldn't pay if we had leadership that actually knew what it was doing. The field went dead silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Emma's gaze didn't waver. For a long, tense moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Soldier and superior, fire meeting steel. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady as stone. Cadet Holloway. Fall out. He didn't move. His jaw tightened. Did you hear me? She said quietly. He exhaled sharply and stepped out of formation, throwing his helmet to the ground with a dull thud. Later that evening, the report had to be filed. Emma sat at her desk, typing by the glow of her desk lamp. The barracks outside were alive with murmurs and footsteps, the restless hum of a base that never slept. Her fingers paused on the keyboard as she reread the disciplinary note. Cadet Holloway, insubordination, verbal defiance, disobeyed direct command. She sighed, rubbing her temples. She didn't want to write it. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew what it meant. Another strike could mean expulsion. And despite his arrogance, Holloway was talented, dangerously talented. Sergeant Davis knocked softly before stepping in. Rough day, ma'am? Emma glanced up. You could say that. He leaned against the doorframe. He's a handful. But he's not a bad kid. Then why does he keep acting like one? Davis shrugged. Pressure, pride, maybe both. He's used to being the best. Now he's not. Emma looked past him toward the window, where floodlights painted long shadows across the empty field. I can handle defiance. What I can't handle is disobedience in uniform. That gets people killed. Davis hesitated before nodding. "Understood, ma'am." As he turned to leave, Emma added, "Keep an eye on him, Sergeant," quietly. "I don't want this to escalate." But it already had. The next morning, a whisper started spreading through the cadets' quarters. Holloway was on the brink of being expelled. Some said Emma was targeting him. Others said he brought it on himself. By noon, the rumor had reached Holloway's ears. He sat alone on the steps behind the mess hall, staring at the ground, jaw tight. His hands trembled slightly, though whether from anger or exhaustion, he didn't know. Rivera approached cautiously. "Hey, man?" "Heard about the report." "Yeah," Holloway muttered. "She's doing her job, Mark. You've got to let it go before you." "Before I what?" Holloway snapped, standing abruptly. "Before I speak up? Before I show I'm not scared of her?" Rivera sighed. "This isn't about fear, bro. You're making it personal." Holloway looked away, his voice low. "Maybe it is personal." He didn't say it aloud, but he couldn't shake the memory of his father's words. A retired colonel, cold and demanding. Weak leaders get soldiers killed. Never bow to them. He'd lived by that his entire life. Now, faced with Emma's authority, calm, intelligent, unflinching, something inside him twisted. She represented everything he'd been taught to distrust. That night, as the base settled into darkness, Holloway wrote a note in his training journal. Angry words scribbled across the page. "She's not fit to lead. I won't follow her. Not again." The next day, Emma organized a night operation. It was a standard simulation, stealth navigation, squad coordination, and communication exercises. The goal was to move through a wooded section of the base, eliminate mock targets, and extract without detection. She knew it was risky scheduling Holloway's team again so soon after the confrontation, but part of her believed pressure could forge discipline. At 2,200 hours, the exercise began. Flashlights flickered in the darkness as cadets moved through the trees, whispering commands. The air was cool and damp, filled with the rustle of boots through leaves. Emma followed from a distance with her observers, listening to the radio chatter. Most squads were performing well until the static returned. "Bravo team, status?" she asked. No reply. Then, Holloway's voice, low and tense. "We're adjusting course north. East paths blocked." Emma froze. "Negative, Bravo. Maintain route." "Negative confirmed," Holloway shot back. "Proceeding north." The radio crackled, then went dead. 15 minutes later, Holloway's squad stumbled back into the clearing, disorganized, off route, and visibly shaken. The simulation had failed again. Emma's expression was unreadable as she approached. The observers watched in silence. "Explain," she demanded. Holloway threw his gear down, chest rising and falling with fury. "I followed my instincts, ma'am. The map was outdated. The trail was blocked. You ignored a direct order again," she said, cutting him off. "Because your order didn't make sense." For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then she stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "This isn't about orders, cadet. It's about control. You think you're proving strength by breaking rules, but all you're proving is fear." That struck him like a physical blow. His face flushed. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're better than this," she said softly. "And I know that if you keep letting anger lead, it'll destroy you, and anyone who follows you." For the first time, Holloway didn't respond. His breathing slowed. His eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or confusion. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same guarded defiance. Emma turned to the squad. "Dismissed." As the cadets dispersed into the night, Holloway stayed behind, staring after her. Every part of him wanted to walk away, but something inside twisted tighter instead. He didn't realize it yet, but that night marked the moment his resentment began to turn dangerous. And for Lieutenant Emma Carter, the battle for respect was about to become a fight for survival. The storm had been building for weeks. Everyone on base could feel it, in the tightness of morning drills, in the clipped orders, in the silence that followed Emma Carter's footsteps down the training line. The base wasn't just running on discipline anymore. It was running on tension, thick and combustible, like gunpowder waiting for a spark. And that spark was about to come from Cadet Mark Holloway. The morning started as routine. At least, it was supposed to. The sun barely touched the horizon as cadets assembled in perfect lines on the parade field. The air was cool, the ground still damp from the night's dew. Emma stood before them in her crisp uniform, her gaze sharp as ever. Today's evaluation will test your coordination, mental discipline, and your trust, she announced. You succeed together, or you fail together. Dismissal will not be an option for anyone unwilling to cooperate. Her tone was measured, professional. But everyone knew the real reason behind the words. Holloway's team had failed twice, and this was his last chance. As she walked down the line, her boots clicking rhythmically, she could feel Holloway's stare follow her. There was something in it she couldn't quite define. Not anger, not yet. It was colder, detached, like he'd stopped seeing her as his superior and started seeing her as his enemy. The exercise took place inside the base's urban warfare simulation complex, a sprawling setup of concrete walls, mock alleys, and steel towers. The cadets were to clear the area of enemy combatants while maintaining radio contact and chain of command discipline. Emma stood in the control tower overlooking the site. Her headset crackled with voices, short, sharp bursts of communication as teams moved through the maze. At first, everything went smoothly. Bravo Team, Holloway's squad, moved like a machine. His commands were crisp, efficient. Emma even allowed herself a brief nod of approval. But then, a series of loud pops echoed through the complex. Simulated gunfire, followed by shouting. Bravo Team, report. Emma demanded through her headset. No answer. Static hissed. Then, Holloway's voice, low, agitated. We've got a malfunction with the radio unit. Continuing the operation. Emma frowned. Negative, Bravo. Return to checkpoint and await tech support. Negative received, he said, but there was a hint of mockery in his tone. Emma's pulse quickened. Holloway, that's a direct order. Return immediately. No reply. She stormed down from the tower, each step echoing through the metal staircase. By the time she reached the ground level, a few instructors had already gathered by the perimeter fence, watching the chaos unfold on the surveillance screens. He's gone off route again, Sergeant Davis muttered, jaw tight. Emma's jaw clenched. Lock the east exit. I'll deal with him myself. She grabbed her field radio and entered the complex, her boots crunching over gravel and debris. The simulated streets were eerily quiet, the sound of distant gunfire replaced by a tense silence that made every footstep feel amplified. Holloway, she called out, voice commanding but calm. Nothing. Only the sound of a door, creaking somewhere deeper inside the maze. She turned a corner and froze. Holloway was standing in the middle of the training courtyard, rifle in hand. His helmet was off, his face streaked with sweat and frustration. The rest of his team stood a few yards behind him, wide-eyed and silent. Cadet Holloway, Emma said, keeping her tone level, drop your weapon and step back. This exercise is over. He didn't move. Ma'am, he said slowly, voice trembling with contained anger. You keep saying we fail because of me. Because I don't follow your rules. But maybe your rules are the problem. Put the weapon down. He took a step closer. The cadets behind him shifted uneasily. Rivera whispered, "Mark, stop," but Holloway didn't hear him. His breathing was heavy, his knuckles white around the grip of his training rifle. "They don't listen to us, ma'am. They just order. They don't care what we see out there, what we know. I'm tired of being treated like a machine that just obeys." Emma took a slow step forward, her voice calm but firm. "You're not a machine, Holloway. You're a soldier. And soldiers don't get to pick which orders they follow." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then maybe I'm not a soldier." And before anyone could react, he raised the rifle. Right at her. The courtyard went completely still. Every cadet froze. No one dared breathe. Even the distant buzz of the bass seemed to disappear. Emma's heart pounded, but her voice stayed eerily steady. "Mark," she said quietly, dropping her own weapon to the ground. "That's not you talking right now. You're angry, but you don't want to cross that line." His eyes flickered, conflicted, but his hands didn't lower. "You don't understand what it's like," he said, voice shaking. "You stand up there, commanding, judging, while we're the ones breaking down out here. You humiliate me in front of everyone." Emma took another step. "You humiliated yourself by refusing to listen. You think you're standing up for yourself, but this isn't strength, Holloway. It's fear." His jaw tightened. "Don't call me that. Then prove me wrong," she said softly. "Put the gun down." For several long seconds, no one moved. The air between them was electric, the kind of silence that could shatter with a breath. Then, from behind him, Rivera whispered again, "Mark, please." Something inside Holloway cracked. His grip faltered just slightly. And in that split second of hesitation, the base security team, watching from the control tower, made their move. A deafening bang echoed through the complex as the door burst open. Soldiers flooded in, shouting commands. Holloway spun around, startled, the rifle trembling in his hands. Then he froze, realizing how it looked. He dropped to his knees, the weapon clattering to the ground. His voice broke. "I wasn't going to shoot her. I swear I wasn't." Emma didn't move for a moment. Her hands were still trembling, though she hid it well. Slowly, she approached, signaling for the others to stand down. She stopped a few feet from him and knelt. "I know you weren't," she said softly. "But this could have ended a lot worse." Tears stung Holloway's eyes. The adrenaline drained from him all at once, leaving nothing but shock and regret. Later that evening, the base was quieter than anyone could remember. The story spread fast, how a cadet had pointed a gun at an officer and nearly destroyed his career, his future, and maybe more. Emma sat alone in her office, staring at the blank report form on her desk. She could write the truth, that Holloway had broken down, that he'd lost control, or she could write something else. Something that didn't end his life before it began. When Sergeant Davis entered, she looked up. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "the board's going to ask for a full incident report." "I know," she replied. He hesitated. "What are you going to tell them?" Emma took a deep breath, looking out the window where the training grounds still glistened under floodlights. That a young soldier made a mistake, and that he needs help, not punishment. Davis nodded slowly. "That's generous." "It's necessary," she said. "We don't fix broken soldiers by breaking them more." That night, as Holloway sat in the detention wing awaiting review, he stared at the ceiling, hollow, quiet, defeated. He had expected rage, shame, maybe even hatred from his commanding officer. But instead, she'd shown him something far worse to his pride: mercy. And for the first time, he began to understand what leadership truly meant. What the entire base witnessed that day wasn't just a breakdown, it was a revelation. Even under threat, Lieutenant Emma Carter had led not with fear, but with restraint, humanity, and courage. And when the board asked her days later what had really happened in that courtyard, she simply said, "A cadet lost control, and the leader refused to." The morning after the incident, Fort Jackson looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air seemed heavier, as if the base itself knew something irreversible had happened within its walls. The courtyard where it had all unfolded was now sealed off, yellow tape fluttering faintly in the early breeze. Officers passed through quietly, their faces set, their eyes avoiding one another. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew. The moment Holloway raised that rifle, everything changed. Lieutenant Emma Carter sat alone in the briefing room, her uniform immaculate, her face composed, but inside, her thoughts ran like wildfire. She had replayed the moment 100 times in her mind. The look in his eyes, the tremble in his voice, the unbearable silence before the chaos. Every time she asked herself the same question, could I have stopped it sooner? The door opened, breaking her thoughts. Colonel James Weller, commander of the base, stepped in. He was a large man with a deep voice and a presence that filled any room he entered. "Lieutenant," he said, pulling out a chair across from her. "You all right?" She nodded automatically. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. "I've read the preliminary report. The cadet pointed a rifle at you. Security intervened before any harm was done. That's the official version." Emma didn't answer. "But I want to know the rest," he said. "What happened out there, really?" She took a slow breath. "Sir, Cadet Holloway lost control. The pressure, the resentment, it had been building for weeks. He didn't intend to shoot. I'm certain of that." Weller's eyes narrowed. "You're certain?" "Yes, sir. He's not a threat. He's lost." The colonel leaned back, fingers tapping the table. "You're aware of the regulations. Pointing a weapon at a superior officer, simulation or not, is grounds for immediate expulsion and possible court-martial." "I'm aware, sir." "And yet, your report doesn't recommend either." Emma met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "No, sir. I'm recommending psychological evaluation and probationary reinstatement. Holloway needs help, not punishment." Weller sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You're asking me to go against protocol for a cadet who almost caused a tragedy. I'm asking you to trust that breaking him won't fix him," she replied quietly. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then the colonel stood. "Very well, Lieutenant. I'll review your recommendation. But understand this. If he falters again, the responsibility will fall on you." Emma nodded. "Understood, sir." As he left, she exhaled slowly. The decision wasn't safe, but leadership wasn't about safety. It was about doing what was right, even when everyone else thought you were wrong. Meanwhile, in the detention wing, Holloway sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. The metal walls of the small room echoed every sound, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the muffled footsteps of guards, the hollow rhythm of his own guilt. He had slept barely 2 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again. Emma standing before him, calm even as he raised the rifle. Her voice echoing through his mind. This isn't strength. It's fear. He'd thought he was proving himself that day. Instead, he'd proved how lost he really was. When Sergeant Davis entered, Holloway didn't look up. "You here to deliver the verdict?" Davis crossed his arms. "You think that's how this works?" Holloway gave a bitter laugh. "I pointed a weapon at a superior officer, Sarge. There's no how it works. I'm finished." Davis studied him. "Maybe. Maybe not. Lieutenant Carter's fighting to keep you here." That made him look up. "She's what?" "Wrote in her report that you weren't a danger, that you snapped under pressure and deserve a chance to redeem yourself." Holloway stared at the wall. Why would she do that? After everything I said? After what I almost did? Davis shrugged. Maybe she sees something you don't. 2 days later, Holloway was summoned to the review board. He stood at attention before 3 officers, Colonel Weller, Captain Ruiz, and Lieutenant Carter herself. The air in the room was heavy with formality. Colonel Weller's tone was firm but even. "Cadet Mark Holloway, your actions on October 12th constitute a serious breach of conduct. Pointing a weapon, even a simulation rifle, at an officer violates the foundation of military discipline." "Yes, sir," Holloway said quietly. "However," Weller continued, glancing toward Emma, "your commanding officer has requested leniency. She has made the case that your behavior resulted from psychological strain rather than malicious intent." Holloway's throat tightened. He looked up, briefly meeting Emma's eyes. Calm, steady, unreadable. "You will be placed under probation," the colonel continued. "You'll attend mandatory counseling sessions, complete additional training under Lieutenant Carter's supervision, and face immediate dismissal if any further misconduct occurs. Do you accept these terms?" "Yes, sir," Holloway said firmly. "Very well," Weller said. "Dismissed." As Holloway saluted and turned to leave, Weller added quietly, "Son, make this second chance count. You won't get another." That evening, as Holloway stepped back into the cadet quarters, every conversation stopped. The room went silent. Some looked at him with fear, others with judgment. But one thing was clear. He was no longer just another cadet. He was the one who pointed a gun at a lieutenant and survived. Rivera approached slowly, uncertain. "Mark, you okay?" He managed a tired smile. "Define okay." Rivera hesitated, then said, "She saved you, man. You know that, right?" "I know," Holloway said quietly. "And I don't deserve it." Later that night, Holloway stood outside the training field, staring at the empty space where everything had gone wrong. The floodlights buzzed softly above him, the night air cool against his face. He heard footsteps behind him and didn't have to turn to know who it was. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" he said. Emma stopped beside him. "Granted." He hesitated. "I don't understand you. You could have ended my career, and nobody would have blamed you. But you didn't." Emma looked out over the field, her expression thoughtful. "You're not the first cadet to break under pressure, Holloway. But you're one of the few who showed me something I could work with afterward. Remorse." He swallowed. "I don't deserve to be here." She turned to face him. "Then earn it. Every day you show up, every order you follow, every mistake you own, that's how you earn it back." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Because I'm not finished with you yet." Over the next few weeks, Holloway threw himself into his duties with a focus that surprised everyone, especially himself. He ran drills until his legs shook, stayed up nights restudying protocols, volunteered for the hardest assignments. The whispers didn't stop, but neither did he. Emma watched from a distance, saying little, but noting everything. She saw the way he no longer argued, how he asked questions instead of challenging commands. It wasn't submission, it was growth. One evening, after a grueling navigation exercise, Davis found Emma standing by the track, arms crossed, watching Holloway collapse to the ground in exhaustion. "He's different now," Davis said quietly. Emma nodded. "Pain changes people. The right kind of pain teaches them. Think he'll make it?" She looked out at Holloway, who was sitting alone on the field, breathing hard but refusing to quit. "I think he already has." But even as peace slowly returned to Fort Jackson, the echoes of that day still lingered in both their minds. Holloway carried the weight of what he'd done like a scar, invisible but permanent. And Emma, though she'd stayed composed, knew the truth she couldn't admit aloud. She still woke at night sometimes, hearing the click of that rifle, and wondering just how close it had come. The base had moved on. The cadets trained, the drills resumed, the routines returned. But something deeper had shifted, not just between Holloway and Emma, but across the entire unit. For the first time, the cadets saw their commanding officer not as an untouchable figure, but as human. And they saw Holloway not as the rebel who fell, but as the man who stood back up. 2 months had passed since the courtyard incident, yet the memory of that day still lingered in the quiet corners of Fort Jackson. The cadets didn't talk about it openly anymore, but the story had become a kind of unspoken legend, a tale told in glances and whispers. And at the center of it were 2 names no one could forget: Lieutenant Emma Carter and Cadet Mark Holloway. For Holloway, those 2 months had been a battle, not against others, but against himself. Every morning he woke before dawn, laced his boots, and trained harder than he ever had. Not because anyone asked him to, because he needed to. He wasn't running toward redemption anymore. He was running from the man who had once raised a rifle in anger. Emma watched his progress closely. From a distance, she saw a man reshaping himself, not through pride, but through humility. But part of her still wondered if the transformation would hold when life threw its next test at him. That test came sooner than anyone expected. It started with a joint field operation, a live simulation between Fort Jackson and a visiting National Guard unit. The exercise, known as Operation Iron Veil, was designed to mimic real combat coordination, terrain navigation, live communication, and rapid response under pressure. For the cadets, it was their biggest challenge yet, and for Holloway, it was his chance to finally prove he could lead the right way. Emma stood at the planning table, briefing the teams. "This simulation involves live rounds," she said firmly. "Safety protocols are non-negotiable. Cadet leaders will maintain contact every 15 minutes. If radio silence exceeds that window, you pull back and report. No exceptions." Her gaze lingered on Holloway. He met her eyes steady. "Understood, ma'am. Make sure your team understands too," she said. He nodded once, determined. The operation began at dawn. A convoy of transport trucks carried the cadets into the thick woods east of the base. The terrain was rough, uneven ground, scattered brush, narrow trails. Teams spread out to designated coordinates, their radios crackling with chatter and static. Holloway led Bravo Squad, 6 cadets strong, with Rivera once again as his second. Their objective: locate a downed communications beacon, secure the area, and relay coordinates for simulated evacuation. Everything went smoothly, until it didn't. By late afternoon, storm clouds rolled in, turning the sky an iron gray. Rain began to fall in sharp, cold sheets. The ground turned slick, visibility dropped, and the radio started acting up. "Signal's cutting out," Rivera said, tapping his headset. Holloway frowned, adjusting the frequency. "Try the backup channel." Rivera shook his head. "Dead too." Holloway glanced at the map. They were close to the beacon site, but still a few clicks out. The storm was worsening fast. "Bravo to base," Holloway tried. "We're experiencing signal loss. Continuing to target location unless ordered otherwise." No response. Just static. He hesitated. For a moment, he remembered Emma's words from the briefing. No contact means pull back. The old version of him would have pushed forward out of pride. But this time, he weighed the risk. He looked at his team, tired, soaked, waiting for his decision. Finally, he said, "We pull back 200 meters and wait for reconfirmation." Nobody moves alone. It was a small decision, but a crucial one. Leadership, real leadership, wasn't about being fearless. It was about being smart enough to fear the right things. Back at base, Emma sat at the command console, watching the radar. The storm had caused multiple blackouts across the area. Bravo Team's last ping was 15 minutes ago, an operator reported. Signal's down. Emma leaned over the map. Get me their coordinates before the system went offline. The tech tapped furiously. Got it. Grid 7 Delta. But there's another issue, Mom. Alpha Team was rerouted nearby after a navigation error. If either team moves without contact, Emma's eyes widened. They could cross into each other's line of fire. Without hesitation, she grabbed her gear. Patch me through to field frequency, manually if you have to. The operator hesitated. Ma'am, the storm's grounding all vehicles. You can't. I'm not asking, she said, already strapping on her vest. Out in the woods, Bravo Team crouched under a rock overhang, the rain pelting down like bullets. Holloway checked his compass again, frustration written across his face. Still no signal? Rivera shook his head. Nothing. The rest of the team was quiet. One of the younger cadets, Miller, looked nervous. Sir, what if we can't re-establish contact? Holloway was about to answer when a gunshot cracked through the trees. Everyone froze. Positions. He barked, instinct taking over. They took cover behind fallen logs, scanning the tree line. Another shot, closer this time. Return fire, Holloway ordered. The cadets fired toward the source, bursts of sound echoing through the rain-soaked woods. But then a voice screamed through the storm. Cease fire. Friendly unit. Friendly unit. Holloway's blood ran cold. He waved frantically. Hold fire. Cease fire. The forest went silent again, save for the rain. From the shadows, another group of cadets emerged, Alpha Team. Their leader, Cadet Torres, looked shaken. We thought we were under attack. Our comms are down too. Holloway cursed under his breath. They'd almost shot each other. Meanwhile, Emma pushed through the woods, soaked to the bone, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Her radio crackled, barely audible. Bravo. Alpha, line of fire. Her heart leapt. She moved faster, ignoring the mud dragging at her boots. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. When she finally reached the clearing, she saw both teams facing each other across the open field, rifles lowered, but still drawn. The tension in the air was suffocating. Holloway. She called out, her voice cutting through the storm. Every head turned. Holloway blinked in disbelief. Ma'am, what are you doing here? Saving you from another damn court-martial, she snapped, stepping between the two squads. Weapons down, now. Both teams obeyed immediately. The relief that swept through the group was palpable. Some cadets even laughed nervously, shaking their heads. But Emma wasn't smiling. She walked straight up to Holloway. You disobeyed my fallback order. Ma'am, he said carefully, I didn't move forward. I pulled back to maintain cover. We lost signal. She studied him for a moment, the rain dripping from her cap. Then finally she nodded. You made the right call. Holloway blinked. I did? Yes, she said. If you'd advanced, Alpha Team might not be standing here right now. The realization hit both of them at once. The decision he'd made, the one that went against his old instincts, had saved lives. When they returned to base hours later, soaked and exhausted, the storm had finally begun to break. The sky was clearing, streaks of dawn painting the horizon in pale gold. Emma dismissed the teams, then turned to Holloway. You kept your head when everything went wrong. That's leadership. He met her eyes. You taught me that, ma'am. She smiled faintly. No, Holloway. You taught yourself. I just refused to give up on you. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile back. Not out of pride, but gratitude. That night, as Emma wrote her final report on Operation Iron Veil, she paused before typing the closing line. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she wrote, "Cadet Mark Holloway demonstrated exceptional leadership under pressure. His judgment prevented a potential friendly fire incident. Recommended for advancement." She sat back, exhaled deeply, and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Across the base, in the cadet barracks, Holloway lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the rain outside. For the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson, he felt something unfamiliar peace. The man who once stood defiant before his commander had become the soldier she believed he could be. And neither of them would ever forget the storm that forged that change. The weeks after Operation Iron Veil were a calm before the storm. Holloway continued to train hard, proving himself in every drill and simulation. Cadets whispered about his turnaround, noting the quiet determination that now radiated from him. Emma watched him with cautious optimism. She had seen the old Holloway, reckless, defiant, nearly unstoppable in his anger. But she had also seen the man he was becoming, thoughtful, capable, and willing to listen. She knew, however, that no amount of drills could fully prepare them for the real unpredictability of life. It happened on a Thursday morning, just as the base was settling into routine. The sky was clear, the sun rising over the training grounds, and the cadets were preparing for a standard obstacle course. Emma was walking across the parade field when a loud siren pierced the morning calm. Emergency. All personnel report to the command center immediately. The siren was not a drill. Emma sprinted to the command tower, her boots thundering against the concrete. Inside, chaos unfolded. Monitors flickered with images from across the base, smoke billowing from a storage hangar, alarms blaring, and cadets and staff scrambling to contain the situation. Explosion in Hangar 3, the operator reported. Possible structural compromise. Unclear if anyone is trapped inside. Emma's eyes hardened. Evacuate surrounding areas immediately. Holloway, get your squad ready for search and rescue. Holloway's heart pounded. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. Lives were at stake. Yes, ma'am, he shouted, sprinting toward his team. Within minutes, Bravo team assembled, clad in protective gear, flashlights, and first aid kits. Holloway led them to the hangar, where flames licked the steel structure and smoke curled into the sky. The acrid smell stung their noses. Floor plan? He asked, scanning the building. Emma appeared beside him. Partial schematics. The south end is compromised. Fire suppression is on the west side. Your priority. Check for trapped personnel. Radios may be unreliable. Stick together. Maintain line of sight. Holloway nodded. This was a far cry from a controlled exercise. Every step could be lethal. As they entered the hangar, the heat hit them immediately. Smoke stung Holloway's eyes, and visibility dropped to a few feet. He signaled to his team to fan out, keeping a close line of sight. Every sound, a creaking beam, a distant crash, made his pulse spike. Minutes felt like hours as they searched through the debris. Holloway's training kicked in. Breathe, observe, act decisively. Over here. Rivera's voice called from behind a stack of crates. They rushed over to find Private Miller, dazed and coughing, pinned beneath a fallen metal beam. Help me lift it, Holloway commanded. Together, they hoisted the beam just enough to free him. Miller scrambled out, shaking and coughing, but otherwise unharmed. Good work, Holloway said, clapping him on the shoulder. Stay close. Keep moving. But the chaos wasn't over. Another shout rang out from deeper in the hangar. Mom! Ma'am, we can't find the exit. Emma's voice was steady but urgent. Hold on, I'm coming. Holloway turned, eyes wide. Emma had entered the structure, smoke swirling around her uniform. The heat was intense, and her voice carried authority despite the danger. "Listen up," she shouted over the roar of fire. "I need your team to form a chain. We'll get everyone out safely. Follow my lead." Holloway's chest tightened. The woman who had once stood calmly in front of a rifle was now moving with surgical precision through real danger. And he realized he trusted her completely. They moved through the hangar, cadets linked together. Holloway's training, combined with Emma's guidance, allowed them to locate another trapped group near the northern end. 3 technicians surrounded by falling debris. "Clear the path," Holloway barked. Using crowbars and teamwork, they created a passage. The technicians stumbled through to safety, coughing, their fear palpable. Emma turned to Holloway. "2 more sections to check. I'll take the east corridor. You handle the west. We meet at the exit." Holloway swallowed, adrenaline surging. He had to do this right, no mistakes. "Understood, ma'am." As he led his squad down the west corridor, the floor beneath them trembled. A support beam cracked loudly. Dust and small debris rained down. "Brace yourselves," he yelled. The cadets hit the ground just as a section of ceiling collapsed behind him, narrowly missing the line. Every instinct screamed at him to panic. But he didn't. He was calm, focused, responsible. Deep in the west wing, Holloway heard faint cries. A young cadet, barely more than a trainee, was trapped beneath a fallen storage rack. "Hold on, I've got you," Holloway shouted, assessing the weight of the debris. With Rivera and 2 others, they lifted it together. The cadet scrambled free, terrified but unharmed. Holloway's chest heaved. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose, stronger than fear, stronger than guilt. He had done right, by thinking first, by acting decisively, by trusting his training. Minutes later, Holloway and his squad emerged into the open air, the morning sun cutting through the lingering smoke. Emma was already there, guiding other cadets to safety. She looked at him and nodded, faintly but unmistakably. "You did well," she said. Holloway blinked, overwhelmed. We got them all out?" Emma's eyes softened slightly. "Yes, thanks to you, none of your team was injured. You trusted your training, and you trusted each other. That's what I've been waiting for." Holloway realized something profound. Leadership wasn't about being fearless. It wasn't about proving you were right. It was about keeping people alive, even if that meant facing fear head-on. Back at the command center, the after-action debrief was tense but full of quiet respect. Colonel Weller surveyed the cadets and instructors. This could have been a disaster. But due to the actions of Lieutenant Carter and Cadet Holloway, everyone is accounted for. Bravo team performed exceptionally under real-life conditions. Holloway's heart swelled with pride, but he didn't let it show too much. He had earned this, quietly, through action, not words. Emma approached him after the debrief, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're ready for the next phase. Not because I say so, but because you proved it today." Holloway nodded, humbled. "Yes, ma'am." That night, Holloway stood alone by the edge of the training field, watching the stars glimmer above Fort Jackson. The hangar fire had been controlled, the smoke cleared, but the lesson remained. Chaos could strike at any moment, and leadership was forged in response, not in theory. He thought back to the day he had pointed a rifle at Emma Carter, the fear, the anger, the defiance. He shuddered. That version of himself no longer existed. And somewhere, deep inside, he felt gratitude, not just for his own survival, but for the woman who had refused to give up on him when the base, the rules, and even he himself might have. For Holloway, the courtyard incident had been a breaking point. But the hangar fire had been a proving point. and both had changed him forever. The days following the hangar fire were quiet, but heavy with reflection. Fort Jackson, once bustling with routine drills and mundane exercises, now carried an air of solemn respect. Every cadet, every officer, every staff member knew that the events of the past week had been a test, not just of skill, but of character, courage, and leadership. For Cadet Mark Holloway, the weight of those tests still lingered. The courtyard incident, the months of probation, and now the fire had forced him to confront the full spectrum of his actions, from fear and defiance to courage and responsibility. He woke early, as always, and walked through the misted training grounds. The base was quiet, and for the first time in months, Holloway allowed himself to breathe without the constant tension pressing on his chest. Inside the administration building, Lieutenant Emma Carter prepared for the base-wide ceremony. Colonel Weller had called for an official recognition of the cadets and staff, who had performed exceptionally during the hangar incident. It was a rare opportunity, a moment to publicly honor bravery, leadership, and teamwork. Emma's mind wandered briefly to Holloway, the man who had once pointed a rifle at her, who had challenged authority and tested patience, now stood at the center of what would be a story of redemption. She felt a quiet pride, tempered by the knowledge that leadership was not measured in accolades, but in the lives one protected. The auditorium was packed. Families of cadets, instructors, and support staff filled the rows of chairs. Cameras and recording devices were set up to capture the ceremony, ensuring that recognition reached beyond the walls of Fort Jackson. Colonel Weller stepped to the podium, his voice commanding. Today we honor those who displayed extraordinary courage and leadership during last week's emergency. Their actions ensured that no lives were lost and that our mission continued despite unforeseen danger. He paused, letting the weight of the moments settle over the room. Among those, one cadet stood out, someone who has faced personal challenges, who has walked a difficult path from defiance to discipline, and who exemplifies the values we seek to instill in every soldier. He gestured toward Holloway. The cadet stood, head bowed slightly, fists clenched at his sides. The applause was immediate, swelling through the auditorium. Holloway felt heat rise to his cheeks, a mix of pride, humility, and disbelief. Emma stepped forward to join him. "You've earned this, Mark," she said quietly, her voice firm but warm. "Not just for today, but for every day you chose to do better than the day before." Holloway met her gaze. It was steady, unwavering, the same gaze that had calmed him during his darkest hour months ago. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. As the ceremony continued, other cadets received recognition for bravery, teamwork, and exceptional response. But Holloway's story became the centerpiece, a narrative of transformation that inspired every trainee in the room. After the ceremony, cadets gathered outside, talking quietly about what had happened. Whispered discussions didn't focus on fear anymore. They focused on lessons. "You saw how he handled it?" one cadet said to another. "After all that's happened, he didn't panic. He kept the team alive." And Lieutenant Carter, another added, she didn't just give up on him. She trusted him, and he trusted her. That's leadership. Holloway overheard this and felt a strange mix of shame and pride. He had once been the story everyone whispered about for all the wrong reasons. Now he was part of the story they would tell as an example of courage and growth. Later, Emma walked with Holloway through the parade grounds. The sun had dipped low, painting the field in gold and shadow. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet earth. "You've come a long way," she said. "I didn't expect this version of you back when you pointed that rifle. But you found it yourself." Holloway shook his head, a small, rueful smile forming. "I don't know if I could have done it without you." Emma's expression softened. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was the right thing. But I knew you had the potential to make it right. And you did? Silence fell between them, comfortable and reflective. Both understood that trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, yet possible. Both also understood that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about taking responsibility when fear was unavoidable. In the weeks that followed, Holloway returned to his training with a renewed sense of purpose. He became a mentor to younger cadets, sharing not only techniques and drills, but also the lessons he had learned about restraint, judgment, and the human cost of leadership. He watched new cadets struggle with confidence and fear, and he reminded them gently, it's not about being perfect. It's about making the right choice when it matters most. Emma observed this quietly, seeing in him a reflection of the values she had fought to instill. Holloway was no longer just a cadet. He was a leader in training, a testament to the fact that second chances could be powerful if met with discipline and dedication. Months later, as Holloway stood at the head of a new training session, a young cadet hesitated on a high rope obstacle. The fear in the cadet's eyes was palpable. Holloway approached, placing a firm hand on the shoulder. Take a deep breath, he instructed. You're going to make it. And even if you fall, you'll get up. That's what being a soldier is about. The cadet nodded, drew courage from his words, and completed the obstacle. Holloway smiled quietly, remembering how far he had come, from fear and rebellion to mentorship and example. Emma, watching from the sidelines, allowed herself a small smile. She knew that leadership wasn't about punishment or control. It was about guidance, trust, and sometimes letting someone prove themselves under fire. The events of the past months became part of Fort Jackson's unofficial history. Stories were told quietly among cadets and instructors, of the cadet who had lost control, the lieutenant who refused to give up, the storm that tested them both, and the fire that proved their strength. Holloway's redemption wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. It reminded everyone at the base that mistakes, even grave ones, could become lessons if met with accountability, courage, and guidance. Emma's leadership, too, became a model, not of rigidity, but of strength tempered with empathy. The story of her composure under threat, her refusal to punish without understanding, and her unwavering trust in the potential of a cadet became legend. Years later, when Holloway looked back on Fort Jackson, he didn't remember the fear, the shame, or even the moments of doubt. He remembered the lessons. That courage is not the absence of fear. That leadership is measured not by control, but by trust. That redemption is possible, even when it seems impossible. He remembered Lieutenant Emma Carter, standing firm when it mattered most, teaching by example, and trusting him when no one else would. And he knew, without a doubt, that the man who had once pointed a gun at her head had become the soldier and the leader she always believed he could be.